Auf Start. Okay, ist live.
A warm welcome. My name is Kerstin, and I'm presenting the third lecture of the Berlin Collapse Total series within a Global Action Week. And we will learn today more about Total's dirty secrets. It is the fifth biggest oil company all over the world. And they already knew in 1971 that climate change is really severe. But nevertheless, they start lobbying against CO2 pricing successfully, and they ignored climate change. And they still do lots of greenwashing. We will hear more about during the session. I want to welcome Katharina Bachmann and Signe Mo from Urgewald. They are working on the global gas and oil exit list called GOGLE. And they will show us also dangerous projects worldwide in Uganda, Tanzania, and the Arctic, what is Total is doing there. And I also want to announce Esteban Servat. We hopefully have him here in the second part of the session. And he's an Argentinian activist, anti-fracking activist. And he has to leave his country because he was not safe there anymore. So we would really be proud to have him here in the second part. So later more. But first, Katharina, Signe, the floor is yours.
Hello, I hope you can see my presentation. Thank you very much for having us, and thank you, Marco, for organizing. Thank you, Kerstin, for the welcoming words. And yeah, we're very happy to present today Urgewald and our newest data project, the Global Oil and Gas Exit List, or GOGLE as we call it. Yes, exactly. So my name is Signe, and this is Katharina, and we work for Urgewald, which is an environmental and human rights NGO based in Germany. And our aim is to follow the money and demand strong environmental and social standards for the international finance industry. Since 2011, our main focus has been on coal and climate. And one main project has been to provide an overview of the companies active in the two main industries driving climate change, coal and oil and gas. This has resulted in the development of two databases. In 2017, we launched the Global Coal Exit List, GCEL. It's updated annually and today provides information on more than 1,000 parent companies in the thermal coal value chain. And 3 weeks ago at COP26 in Glasgow, we launched its sister database, the Global Oil and Gas Exit List. These are both company level databases on the coal and oil and gas industry, respectively. But Urgewald, of course, does not only work on coal and oil and gas. We also work on international financial institutions, on arms, and we have campaigns directly addressing financial institutions. So, for instance, talking at annual meetings to show financial institutions the consequences of their activities. So, why has Urgewald decided to develop company level databases? Well, by now, even Fatih Birol, the executive director of the International Energy Agency, which has not been known for very progressive energy policies, even he acknowledges the urgency of the climate crisis. In May, he stated, "If governments are serious about the climate crisis, there can be no new investments in oil, gas, and coal from this year. But we know that even if the use of coal was phased out overnight, emissions from developed oil and gas reserves would soon exhaust our carbon budget for 1.5 degrees. But still, coal-fired power production continues, and oil and gas companies are still exploring and developing new reserves all over the world and investing trillions of dollars in projects that will lock in high emissions for decades to come. And what we find is that the finance industry plays a key role in this crisis, because behind each company planning new coal-fired power plants or oil and gas ventures, there are banks, investors, and insurers. And without these actors, these projects could simply not be realized. This means financial institutions need to divest from coal, from oil and gas. However, they face a very practical issue when they want to divest, and this is a lack of data. And data is the key to meaningful climate strategies because it allows the financial institutions to identify companies and implement policies in a consistent way. This lack of data is inevitably also affects the possibilities of campaigns. And as we know, civil society is crucial to demand divestment and monitor the implementation of divestment. And for this, they also need data. And this is why we think GCEL and Goggle can be very helpful. As of today, investors representing more than 16 trillion US dollars in assets are already applying one or more of the 3 divestment criteria from the GCEL to screen coal companies out of their portfolios. And the coal exit list has also become an important tool for civil society organizations, for media, for researchers, and even for regulatory bodies. So to date, there have been several policies from financial institutions on coal, but hardly any substantial policies on oil and gas. And this is where Goggle comes in. Goggle is similar to GCEL, but yeah, so it's a company level database on oil and gas, and it puts a face on the global oil and gas industry and names the companies involved. Goggle is the first of its kind. Everyone can access it. It covers 887 companies responsible, and these companies are responsible for more than 90% of global oil and gas production, more than 90% of short-term expansion in oil and gas, and more than 90% of exploration expenditure. And the companies in the midstream sector on our list are responsible for more than 90% of expansion in LNG terminal capacity and nearly 75% of pipeline expansion. Already, several financial institutions have announced that they will use the list for their exclusion policies. And we, of course, want as many people as possible to use it. Also, so anyone working on the oil and gas industry. So because we need to stop the expansion course of the oil and gas industry. Of course, we also need a managed decline of production inevitably, but stopping expansion is the first and most urgent step. In short, the Goggle identifies the big, the dirty, and the dangerous oil and gas companies. So at one glance, you can see the companies with the biggest expansion plans, with unconventional expansion and production, the companies active in or exploring in frontier countries, so countries where there until now has been no oil and gas production or the companies responsible for lock-in into fossil infrastructure. And what kind of sources do we use to provide this information? Well, on the one hand, we use company-based data sources, so simply what the companies themselves publish. So for instance, annual reports or financial statements. But we also rely on information from government agencies and also NGO partners, and especially data from Global Energy Monitor. We also get data from a third-party data provider, which is Rystad Energy. They provide data on asset level for the oil and gas industry. So to go into a bit more detail, what does Goggle tell us about Total, which I gather is the company of interest today? So with just one click, you'll see that Total is the 11th biggest producer, was the 11th biggest producer of oil and gas in 2020. And Goggle is published annually, so we can now see the production numbers for 2020, but in future, it will allow to track if companies actually deliver on their promises, for instance, to reduce their absolute production numbers and so on. Goggle also lets us see how a company's oil and gas production is structured with regard to unconventional production. We include 6 categories of unconventional production, so fracking, coal bed methane, tar sands, Arctic, ultra deep water, and extra heavy oil. And we can see that for Total, for instance, they are active in all these categories. And for instance, 5% of their total production in 2020 came from production in the Arctic. That amounts to more than 51 million barrels of oil equivalent, which means that Total was the 9th largest Arctic producer in 2020. In a world where every new resource, oil and gas resource added, deepens the climate emergency, we need to focus and prevent expansion. So Goggle includes data on short-term expansion. These are oil and gas resources about to be added to the production portfolio of a company. So that means that they will go into production within the next 1 to 7 years. It depends a bit on the type of asset. But yeah, and in the case of Total, they are planning to add more than 4 billion barrels of oil equivalent to their portfolio in the near future. And in comparison, Total is the 7th largest expansionist on Goggle, so in the top 10. Second, or in addition, Goggle includes information on exploration. The Total CEO has stated that oil money will finance the energy transition. I won't try to say it in French, but Goggle shows quite clearly that Total still uses quite a lot of money on oil and gas. This exploration capex figure shows the money a company invests to find new oil and gas resources to exploit, and Total invested $837.2 million US annually, or on average, for annually for the last 3 years. So this means that Total is in the top 20 in terms of exploration and expenditure, or more accurately, number 16. So still aiming on finding quite some oil and gas resources. We can also see the companies that are developing new fossil infrastructure. So pipelines and LNG terminals, which which run for several decades and therefore will lock us into fossil dependency. And Goggle shows that Total has developing 928 kilometers of new pipeline infrastructure. And that's almost as far as from the center of Berlin to the Total headquarters in Paris. A bit, yeah, it's 100 kilometers less, but yeah. And in addition, Total is developing LNG terminal capacity, which amounts to 23.2 million tons per year. And this makes Total the 9th largest expander of LNG terminal capacity on Goggle. Finally, Goggle also lets you see which reputational risk project a company is involved in. So in the database and also on the website, we include these so-called reputational risk projects. And with this term, we refer to the reputational risk that financial institutions face when they support particularly hazardous oil and gas projects and the companies behind these projects. And the thought behind including reputational risk projects on Goggle is to show that oil and gas projects are not only problematic in terms of their greenhouse gas emissions and impacts for the climate, but that many of these projects come with adverse social effects and environmental problems as well. So we want to simply make visible what oil and gas expansion means for the people and nature close to them. We assign the projects to 4 categories of risk. So conflict and violence, environmental destruction, social harm, and litigation. So lawsuits and court cases and so on. And yeah, each project is related to at least one of these risks. And now Katharina will tell a bit more specifically about the projects that Total is involved in.
Thank you very much, Signe. I'm just quickly going to open the presentation. Yes, in this second part of the presentation, I would like to present some of Total's dirty and dangerous projects that we have included in the reputational risk category of the Goggle. And with this part, we hope to provide some insight on how Total's expansion plans play out on the ground. As of November 2021, at the Goggle launch, we have included 20 reputational risk projects in the database, which are located all over the globe and cover conventional as well as unconventional upstream and midstream projects. The reputational risk projects here are only a few of the many oil and gas projects that are currently happening worldwide and are related to different companies. And what is important here is that this overview is not exhaustive, but is rather a growing database, and we will continue to add projects to the reputational risk category. But to our own surprise, we found that Total was involved in many of the projects that are in our reputational risk category of the Goggle's first version. And already from this map, you can see that Total is doing fossil fuel business all over the world, stretching from Canada, Argentina, Guyana to the Arctic, but also to Uganda, Tanzania, and Mozambique, and South Asia, to name the countries of the projects that we have included in the reputational risk category. Today, we would like to present you 2 of Total's projects that we have included on the Goggle. The first one is potentially one of Total's most controversial projects. It's about the oil fields in Uganda and the East African crude oil pipeline, the so-called EACOP. The second project I would like to talk about is potentially less well known, but still equally harmful. And it is one of the projects that is currently very much praised by Total, Arctic LNG-2. In last year's annual report of Total, Total has highlighted its plans to shift its focus to LNG and notably mentions Arctic LNG-2 in Russia. Total sees LNG as a way to reduce the carbon intensity of its activities, while it is clear that there is no such thing as climate-friendly gas. Let me start with Total's Dash for Oil in East Africa, one of Total's most controversial projects. In East Africa, Total is involved in several projects in Uganda and Tanzania, notably the Tilenga and Kingfisher oil fields in northwestern Uganda and the East African crude oil pipeline, a crude oil pipeline that would run more than 1,400 kilometers through Uganda and Tanzania. This pipeline would transport the oil from the oil fields to the Tanzanian coast, from where it would be shipped all over the world. For Tilenga and EACOP, Total holds a major share of the project ownership. Other companies involved are CNOOC, Tanzania Petroleum Development Corporation, and Uganda National Oil Company. These three projects are not yet operational, but the preparation to get them started are currently running. In Uganda, Total wants to produce oil from the Tilenga and Kingfisher oil fields that lie underneath farmland, lakes, and the famous Murchison Falls National Park. The Murchison Falls National Park is one of the, or actually the oldest and biggest natural protected area in Uganda, and a candidate to become a UNESCO Biosphere Reserve. It is also sanctuary for iconic and threatened animals, lions and leopards, elephants, and the Nubian giraffes, which is a critically endangered giraffe species, lives here next to 450 bird species. In this park alone, Total and its partner CNOOC want to drill 132 oil wells. And along with the oil wells, Total will also need to build a network of access roads and pipelines into the national park to gather and transport the oil from the different drilling sites. With such an infrastructure, Total would fragment the habitats of the animals that live in the park. And the dirt and the noise from Total's construction work is already chasing the animals away. Some conservation groups have actually already begun to rescue some giraffe herds and bring them to other national parks. In addition, the risk of spills in this rich and biodiverse landscape is a threat to the land and water as well. And the same is true for EACOP. The pipeline would run through the Lake Victoria Basin, which is a freshwater resource on which millions of people depend. It would also run through countless nature reserves and biodiversity hotspots where lions, buffaloes, hippos, and elephants live. And this has actually led the famous environmentalist Bill McKibben, also co-founder of 350.org, to say, the proposed route looks almost as if it were drawn to endanger as many animals as possible. Total's colossal projects in Eastern Africa are not only a major threat to Uganda's and Tanzania's nature, but also to the people who live in this region and barely had a say in whether they want Total's project to come. For Tilenga alone, Total plans to resettle 31,000 people to make space for the oil fields. In addition, Total has also planned the EACOP pipeline in a way that it would cut through hundreds of Ugandan and Tanzanian villages. Total would invade the lands of more than 86,000 people for the pipeline. And since the resettlement process started, there have been numerous accounts of flawed processes and broken promises. There are numerous reports by human rights organizations that document the social harm that comes from Total's project and the human rights violations linked to it. One of the main concerns is the way that Total deals with the local people. They report that they had not received sufficient information about the projects, and many of them also did not receive fair compensation by Total, if they received any at all. There have also been numerous reports of people who refused to accept Total's meager compensation, and then consequently have been intimidated and threatened by Total's subcontractors. Some of them even had to leave their land and stop farming, even though they had not yet received their compensation. And without their land, many struggle to earn money, feed their families, send their children to school, or afford healthcare, which actually has led to a famine among the local population. For people in Uganda and Tanzania, it has become increasingly difficult to speak up against Total and its projects. Those who don't agree are facing threats and harassment and intimidation by the police, by security forces, and unknown men. In May of this year, the police actually arrested a human rights activist and a journalist who were on their way to talk to people who were suffering from Total's project. There have been many more arrests, and the latest of such incidents happened only a few weeks back in October, when the Ugandan police arrested 6 members of the human rights and environmental organization Afiego, which is one of Total's main critics. However, Total is not getting away with this destructive projects in Uganda and Tanzania. Environmental groups from Uganda and Europe have brought Total to court in France in 2 different court cases that relate to the French duty of vigilance law. This law came into place in 2017 and holds transnational corporations legally accountable for the impacts of their operations all over the globe. The environmental and human rights groups took Total to court for breaching this law with its operations in Uganda and Tanzania, but also due to its lack of climate action. In addition, 4 United Nations special rapporteurs also confronted Total with the human rights abuses that are happening to the critics of Total's Tilenga and EACOP project. Moreover, civil society groups have also launched the Stop EACOP campaign, which has been supported by hundreds of organizations worldwide. And finally, 11 banks have started to realize how disastrous Total's oil expansion plans in Eastern Africa are, and have already distanced themselves from supporting the EACOP financially. A project one of them has called Too Hard to Defend. Now I'd like to take you to a different part of the world, to the Russian Arctic. Total is not even staying away from this so remote area, where it now wants to produce LNG, which is liquefied fossil gas. These projects in the Russian Arctic may be less well known, but not less harmful than the EACOP, which is why we want to highlight them today as another major cause of concern. Total is currently involved in Yamal LNG, an operating LNG terminal on the Yamal Peninsula. Total has an ownership share of 20% in this project. Its partners are Novatek, CNPC, and China Silk Road Fund. But Total is also involved in Arctic LNG 2, which is a proposed LNG terminal on the Gda Peninsula on the other side of the Gulf of Ob. Total has chosen a very special and vulnerable environment for its dash for LNG, the Arctic wilderness. The Arctic tundra on the Yamal Peninsula is a vast landscape where in winter temperatures can drop to -57 degrees. It is the home to Arctic foxes, birds, lemmings, and hundreds of thousands of reindeer. The Arctic tundra on the Yamal Peninsula is also the home of the Nenets indigenous people who have lived here for thousands of years. The Nenets' way of life is closely interwoven with this Arctic wilderness. The Nenets are nomadic reindeer herders who live from the Arctic tundra. And as the seasons change, they travel across the Yamal Peninsula with their reindeer herds. They travel along ancient migration routes for hundreds of kilometers to bring their reindeer to their pastures. Due to climate change, the Arctic tundra has been changing rapidly. Actually, the Yamal Peninsula is among the most rapidly warming places on Earth. The winters there are becoming increasingly mild, and there's rain, much more rain than ever before instead of snow that used to cover the region. In the winter of 2020, rain also fell on top of a snow layer and formed an unbreakable layer of ice. This was the reason why reindeer could not dig through the snow and feed on the lichen that is covered by the snow underneath the snow cover. As a consequence of this, 80,000 animals starved to death, and hundreds of Nenets families lost their livelihoods. Also, the permafrost underneath the tundra is thawing, resulting in crater-like sinkholes across the tundra. Sometimes these sinkholes are more than 80 meters wide. And this makes migration for the Nenets through this unstable area increasingly risky. But now, with their LNG projects in the Arctic, Total and their partners want to heat up the climate crisis even more that is already wrecking the Arctic wilderness. Moreover, with their gas infrastructure, they are industrializing and fragmenting the Arctic environment. For example, in order to make space and allow the gigantic LNG ships to dock at the LNG terminals, they must dig up the sand from the Gulf of Ob to deepen the water. And this is a real danger to the sensitive marine species that live in the Gulf of Ob, such as the sturgeon, the whitefish, or the freshwater cod. Nenets families already reported that since these operations of Total and their partners began for their LNG terminals, the fish have disappeared from the Gulf of Ob. But Total and their partners have also built service roads and other infrastructure that industrialize the remote area. This infrastructure is crossing the tundra and blocks the Nenets' way to their pastures. And for the Nenets, this means that they and their reindeer have to find new routes through this gigantic industrial maze. As a result, this ongoing environmental destruction and industrialization is forcing many Nenets families to give up their nomadic way of life and instead settle in villages. There, many of them struggle to find work and become dependent on the state for subsistence. And it is clear that Total's dash for LNG will continue to threaten the Arctic wilderness and the Nenets' way of life. So while we only presented 2 of the many fossil fuel projects that Total is involved in here, and there are many more, we hope that you got a bit of an impression of what the expanding oil and gas industry means, not only in terms of the climate, but also for people and nature on the ground. And with this, we hope that you find the Goggle database and the associated reputational risk category that you can find on our website a helpful resource of information. So yes, we'd like to invite you to browse through the website, through the database, and gather much more information on the plans of the oil and gas industry. but also to connect with the groups that are active on the ground to stop Total and other fossil fuel expansionists. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Katharina and Signe, for this really systematically approach. Really interesting idea to make it transparent what big oil is and big gas industry is doing there, and that insurances and investors could see where the biggest stranded assets could wait for them. So yes, who are the companies who are clinging most to coal? This is a question we have today, and your work helps a lot here in this case. So some questions I want to give you from the chat. Can you explain us a little bit more the difference between midstream and upstream projects?
Yeah, so thank you for the question and the kind words, Kerstin. Yeah, so Goggle consists sort of two sections. It's the upstream and the midstream section, and the upstream subsector of the oil and gas industry is the part of the oil and gas industry which involves the actual extraction of the resource from the ground. So so these are companies that actually produce oil and gas. And the midstream subsector refers to oil and gas infrastructure. So this is, for instance, pipelines and also LNG terminals like in the Arctic, so liquefied natural gas. Yeah, and then you also have downstream, which is then, for instance, power generation and so on.
Okay, another question. Apart from Total, which other fossil fuel companies are still expanding? Who are the most critical oil companies we have to look at?
So if you look at Goggle, actually 96% of the companies on the list have some kind of expansion. So they are have expansion in the short term or have stated that they have expenditure for exploration. So everyone is expanding, but of course there are, I can't quite remember, but it's a quite few companies are responsible for 50% of oil expansion in the short term. But I mean, Total is, I think, number 7, didn't I say, in terms of short-term expansion. But above Total we have, yeah, Qatar is the is the company with the most expansion, Qatar Energy, then Gazprom, Saudi Aramco, the Saudi Arabian oil company, and then Exxon is also above Total, and also Petrobras, the Brazilian company, and Turkmengas, so the Turkmenian company.
Yes. Do you have also some good examples who tries to invest into greener technology and make some pilot projects? Who are the possible the positive examples?
Goggle is really a blacklist or a list of the bad. So we don't really focus on, we just look at the oil and gas production. So we don't sort of weigh it up with other commitments in terms of renewables, for instance, because we need to move away from oil and gas expansion and oil and gas production. And then of course, it's good that oil and gas companies also move into other areas, but if it's not visible in the oil and gas numbers, in their production numbers and expansion numbers, it's irrelevant for us. So we don't really want to highlight the good guys.
Yes, okay.
Also, you have to be quite careful, I would say, if you look at what the companies are doing, as for example, for the projects in the Arctic, which are considered as a way to reduce the carbon intensity of the portfolio of Total, which is, of course, a way to kind of make it sound better than it is. There is fossil gas is still fossil gas. It is carbon intensive. And most of the time, companies don't even look at the emissions that come from methane, the direct methane emissions that are not counted in when they're looking at the carbon footprint that they are causing. So you have to be quite careful.
Yes, I was asking this because I saw some planning numbers from Total that they want to reduce oil slightly, but that they want to make more gas projects, and they want a little bit on the renewable side. So in the end, they hire up the fossil part, and that's can't be the solution. So yes, we have got another question in the chat. Does Total get loans from European private banks for projects like those?
I'm not quite sure what whether about these two projects there are private loans, but yeah, well, Total, like many other companies, do apply for loans from private banks that are either project-based or company-based. So I'm very sure that there are definitely projects supported by the private banks in Europe.
We will also do within sometime next year a finance research related to the companies on Goggle, and then we will have more accurate information on who is actually financing the different companies on our list.
There's not only bad big oil, it's also bad banks. Yes. Another question, at EACOP, we have seen that they went on without insurances. Who, how big do you judge the risks that this example will be copied? Can this happen again? Is this a new style of big oil to ignore insurances?
Well, what we have seen is that at least 11 banks have officially dropped out of giving financial support to this project. And this is already a big commitment to make to deem a fossil project too dangerous to subscribe to and to support it. And this is also what you see for other projects, for coal companies, for example, who have difficulties to find insurance or financial support for their projects, or for example, for pipelines in Canada, the Trans Mountain pipeline, for example, had big problems to secure insurance this year. They even had to ask the regulators to keep the insurance companies a secret, because the public pressure that was building up around this pipeline project, a very harmful project as well, was getting so big that the company didn't want their insurance companies to be public in order to gain that access to the insurance. So what you can see from that is that these campaigns, in order to persuade financial institutions to stay clear of such risky projects, are already playing out, but there's of course potential for much more.
So we have got another question. How do you rate the risk of oil spill in the Arctic?
I mean, the risk is definitely higher than with conventional offshore production, just because the climatic conditions are so much rougher. The temperatures are lower, the waves are higher, it's dark, it's foggy. In winter, it's dark all the time. And so it's not only, on the one hand, the one point is that yeah, it's maybe more probable with a risk, but the more important issue is that it's more or less impossible to clean up a spill. So any spill that happens will be much more severe than in more calm waters or in other regions, because there is hardly technology to clean this type of spill. Even the companies themselves admit that in parts of the winter it's impossible to clean up a spill in the Arctic. And then additionally, the waves whip up the oil, so it becomes more toxic, and so then the spill sort of becomes even more dangerous. And yeah, and of course now with the building or increase of like an LNG transport and so on in the Arctic, this boom also of course means that there's more transport, so more shipping and so on. So this increases the danger of collisions or any type of accident involving shipping traffic. So, and this again could lead to spills of extra or of heavy oil or from the ships themselves. So, yeah.
So it's really risky, yes. The next question I have here, can you recognize Total's intention to deliberate a lack of action about bad social policies causing the land grabbing, e.g. at EACOP?
There has been, yeah, as I mentioned earlier, there have been a lot of reports on this, and I find it hard to recognize an intention or point out an intention there. But what I would assume is that the practices of Total in relation to how to deal with the local population and informing and gaining their consent to this project, and if not, then leaving that project be. Yeah, that this has become a bit more difficult also through the use of subcontractors. So what you see in many projects is also that there are different companies involved, so that it becomes increasingly difficult to also track what is going on. Yeah, but I mean, the fossil fuel industry depends on taking up land and taking up resources. So from how I would understand this is that the intention behind this is making money, making profits. But this is my interpretation of this.
Here's an idea from someone who's listening us. Will the Lieferkettengesetz help here maybe?
Do you want to say?
Yes,
I find it hard to say, because I'm also not quite sure at which stage the Lieferkettengesetz is at the moment. I just noticed that there was a lot of discussion lately.
Yeah, they decided something, but if the control mechanism is good enough to find out in every small edge of the world what is really happening there. There was a discussion of if it's the control mechanism is hard enough, yes. But in principle, that we also look if we buy here something in Europe, that it's we could cause somewhere else troubles because children are working there or earth is poisoned there. I think it's the right idea, but it has to be adapted really all over the world, and yes, it has to control it.
In similar regards, this duty of vigilance law that is implemented in France is also trying to hold companies like Total accountable for their actions in other parts of the world, and also those of their subcontractors. But what has been, what can be seen from these two cases that have been brought against Total is also that it's of course, like in many laws and lawsuits, also a very ongoing process that takes up a lot of time and may also take a hold in front of the courts due to procedural aspects. But of course, this is probably an issue that is really worth investigating and also learning from different laws from different states.
Yes, but we learned that in the Shell case, they moved from Netherlands to Great Britain now because they have got the task to reduce 45% of their emission. They switched the country so they don't have to accept what the court is, the court decision. So we see that we really need global solutions, and yes, other global solution could be CO2 pricing worldwide, where they talked in Glasgow now about. Is it a solution in your opinion also for the problem, or do we have other ideas?
With CO2 pricing, I think what also comes out of the goggle a bit is that the CO2 pricing would, for example, never ever be able to cover the environmental and social impacts of the project. So even if you would be able to find a price that somehow covers the climatic costs, you would still not be able to cover what the projects mean on the ground for the people and nature.
So we have another question out of the chat. Are there contacts between urgewald and big oil companies, Total, for example? Are they contact you, or are you contact them?
I mean, Goggle is aimed at financial institutions. So we do work with the financial institutions that use our list, or we communicate with them to ensure that they use it in a good way, and to talk to them about what is possible with our list. But we don't work with oil companies. They can also register on our website, of course, and download the list. But if we work with companies, we work with financial institutions. These are our main target group.
And another question: if we took all these expansion plans together, is it really, with all these planned capacities, is it possible to reach 2.0? I don't talk about 1.5, but is it possible to reach 2.0?
No. No,
we are still already, with all we have planned, far from that.
Or it's a bit. We were working on calculating it, like what it would exactly mean, but it's at least, it's not.
Okay, that's not a good news. Yes. Now we have Esteban here. So thank you, Katharina and Signe, for your really systematically approach and your work. Really interesting, and put pressure on investors and on insurances. It's, I think, a good approach. Yes. Now I welcome Esteban Servat. Hello. And I told the listening people already that you come from Argentina, that you are an anti-fracking activist, that you have to leave your country. And now I want to add that you leaked informations that Argentina, the Argentinian state, already knew really early that fracking in Vaca Muerta is really poisoning, and they covered it up. And as you leaked this information, the protest was getting bigger and bigger. So please tell us, how did all that started?
Thank you, Kerstin. It's nice to be with all of you. Thanks for inviting me, and Marco for organizing. As you said, I'm Esteban, I'm from Argentina, and I will not be presenting a PowerPoint today because I'm on the road. When I received the invitation, I was already on my way to Denmark, where I am now, which is actually, I also came here to take action against Total. So I'll tell you a little bit about the actions that we did over the last few days and about the specific case of Total's role in Argentina and a little bit about our fight to stop fracking in the Vaca Muerta region. So as Kerstin was saying, in the year 2018, well, big noises. I'm not home, as you can see. I'm borrowing someone's computer here in a room that we're staying at.
Everything fine, yes.
Okay, so we leaked. I was not an activist. I was building an eco village in the Mendoza province, which happens to be part of the Vaca Muerta region. Vaca Muerta, for those who don't know, is the world's second largest shale gas and fourth largest shale oil basin. It's a huge carbon and methane bomb that is a ticking time bomb that has been shown but that it will consume nearly 15% of the entire global carbon budget that humanity has left to comply with the 1.5-degree target of the Paris Agreement. So, as you can imagine, this is a carbon bomb that we cannot afford to exploit, where those hydrocarbons need to be left underground. However, Total and many other European corporations, multinationals, are leading the way in the expansion of fracking in Vaca Muerta and beyond around the world, doing the exact opposite of what your governments here in Europe are mostly championing. Paris Agreement, the Global Methane Pledge, the climate law initiatives that are popping up everywhere are in complete contrast with what's going on in reality. I was thinking today, if you were to look at the projected the plans of these corporations, if you got inside of them and you could have access to their projections of the next year, the decades ahead, you would notice that there is a stark contrast between those projections and the projections of the COP and the governments and the Paris Agreement and everything else. It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up. They are driving us to extinction. And that's why I celebrate this week of actions around the world that we're doing under the Collapse Total slogan, and that I've been taking part here in Denmark. In our case, to start at the beginning with our story, I was building an eco village, as I was saying, in the Mendoza province, which is the last province of Vaca Muerta where fracking was introduced. Before that, it was only taking place in the neighboring provinces of Neuquén and Rio Negro. But Mendoza had remained untouched until the end of 2017, which is when the first wells were started in that area. And nobody was talking about fracking. The media were very silent. It was introduced very quietly. The government at the time, Mendoza has a very unique history for climate fights. They were defending. Mendoza is a desert where the little water they have is precious. The irrigation and life in the province is made possible by the few rivers that irrigate the only arable lands that are available. That is only 3% of the entire province surface. The rest is desert. So people really have it in their DNA, the awareness to protect that water. So that's the reason I actually moved there, because 10 years earlier, they had been able to ban mega mining by blocking the roads because mega mining was threatening to contaminate the little water they had. So I knew that this was a place where people would fight for the water, for the environment, whenever it would be threatened again. I just didn't expect me to be involved in the way I ended up being involved. But I had to get involved, because when fracking came, and I was saying the governor at the time and most of the people who were in government, they used to be activists. 10 years earlier, they were activists fighting mining, and used that publicity, you know, the good name they built for themselves in a place where water is so important, then it translates into elections being won. So these people got to power, and the first thing they did after they got power was to betray the very people that had put them in power and their own past, and sell the province to fracking.
Unbelievable, yes.
Yeah, and unfortunately, they also had really deep connections with many of the established environmental resistance. So they were able to infiltrate and neutralize and corrupt many of the groups that had been historically resistant in order to make the resistance against fracking pretty much non-existent. So at that time, we were able, I heard there was a secret study, there was an environmental impact study that was being hidden by the government because it revealed that the first 4 pilot wells of fracking done had already contaminated the water tables. This was being hidden and they were planning to replace, according to the whistleblower, they were planning to replace the results with fake ones that were going to be obtained in a lab, which is located inside a university where the vice dean was at the same time a representative of the fracking company. The fracking company also was owned by the biggest media group in Mendoza province. You can imagine the different conflicts of interest and the level of power and mafia behind this, because they have the media, the justice system, which is a weapon to persecute activists like myself and many others. And to make the long story short, we were able to obtain a copy of this study, and inspired by WikiLeaks, we created EcoLeaks in a very South American low-tech fashion with a simple website and a Facebook page. But this was enough to leak the material and start causing a lot of trouble, because when people began to hear that, they became really indignated. And then it was able to mobilize thousands and thousands of people in a province where the defense of water is so important. So we put up a very fierce resistance, and tens of thousands of people mobilizing across the province for all of 2018. And then also, well, we were persecuted, people, including myself and many others more. We got a lot of criminal cases that were fabricated with the most absurd accusations. One of them against me accused me of public intimidation, saying that I was causing panic in the public, causing them to mobilize by telling them fake news about fracking, which I was in the scientific truth. That is the reason behind the prohibition of fracking in much of Europe and much of the global north. So it was very intense, and we were touching very intense, very big interest. So they were firing back at us big time. In early 2019, I had been successful in turning around a couple of the lawsuits that the government had started against me. And this was very humiliating for them, including against the mayor of my city, who tried to sue me and failed, and it backfired on him. And I filed lawsuits against them, back to them. And that's when the death threats I already was receiving death threats, but now they were targeting my family and my girlfriend. So with her, we decided to come to Germany, where we have been for the last 2+ years, and getting involved in the climate movement in Europe and trying to fight it from this side of the world, which is where many of those multinationals are headquartered. And this is what brings me back to Total. And also where a lot of that gas is to be consumed, as Europe is building a lot of LNG import terminals to import fracked gas. And the easy part of all of this is that they're selling to the public that fracked gas is cleaner than coal. But not only is gas has similar emissions to coal when you consider all the production cycle, and fracked gas has actually 40 to 60% higher carbon footprint than coal itself. So they're trying to tell us to transition away from coal into something worse than coal is absolute insanity. And also with such a major climate crime and ecocide, such as fracking, which you have banned in Europe, much of Europe, companies are leading the destruction on the other side of the world in the global south. So Total is leading the way. Total is leading the way. Total has over 700 square kilometers of land as a concession that it's holding already and exploiting in Vaca Muerta. Vaca Muerta, as I was saying, is huge. In terms of size, it's about the size of Belgium. And the land in Vaca Muerta mostly coincides with the territory of the Mapuche people. This is an indigenous group that has been there for thousands of years. and they are paying the highest price for the fracking operations. The children in Vaca Muerta, the leukemia ratio is huge. The children are dying of leukemia at a rate that is 3 times higher than the national average. And leukemia is just one of the many innumerable diseases that take place as a consequence of so many contaminants that are put into the ground and into the water tables with the fracking techniques. It usually uses a cocktail of nearly 600 chemicals that have the function of breaking up and diluting rocks and liberating, freeing up the gas and oil so that it can be extracted. And it's not just those chemicals, because from deep underground where fracking takes place, it's also extracting, and the flow back also brings back heavy metals, radioactive particles, including radon. The gas is a highly carcinogenic gas that is extremely toxic and highly carcinogenic at very low concentrations, and it volatilizes and flies away up to 1,000 kilometers. It can cause disease. So all of these things are suicidal. They are sacrificing entire populations and communities and territories on the other side of the world so that Total can have bigger profits and bigger returns for investment in Europe and wherever their investors are across the world. The problem with this is that it's not only destroying our land in Argentina or in Mozambique, where they're also causing a lot of destruction, or in Russia, where the Nenette people are suffering the devastation of Total's gas extraction. Total is the world's second biggest LNG producer, which is mostly being produced by frack gas, which, as you may know, is also revolutionizing the availability of gas. The gas market has been revolutionized by the creation and the utilization of fracking in around 2008 and 9, mainly in the US, which has led the US to become, from a net importer of energy, to be one of the leading exporters of oil and LNG. And taking that farther, Trump even said, we are going to dominate the world with fracking. He called this policy American energy dominance. I want to put that out there because many people have never heard of this, but just so you understand in what context we are sacrificing the planet and the livelihood of entire nations so that the US can have American energy dominance, and there can be plenty more gas for the decades to come. But fracking is also a leading cause of methane emissions in the world, and science has shown in a groundbreaking study from Dr. Howard from Cornell University in 2019, he showed that fracking is responsible for more than 50% of all increased methane emissions globally over the last decade. And more than 1/3 of the increase when you take into account all sources, including biological. It's more than 50 when you take into account only the fossil fuel industry. So at a time when the governments such as France, which is where Total is headquartered, are championing the global methane pledge, which is committing to reducing emissions of methane by 30% by the end of this decade, Total and Shell and BP and Equinor and Wintershall from Germany are doing the exact opposite, increasing methane emissions by developing new fracking wells in Vaca Muerta and all over the world, and the governments are looking the other way. And this is why I celebrate, and I'm really excited that more and more and more of us, we are focusing our efforts on the big elephant of the room, the elephant in the room of the climate crisis, which are the multinational fossil fuel corporations that have gone untouched for decades, for way too long. The governments are not going to tackle them. The governments are financed by them, they're lobbied by them, their campaigns are paid for by them in many cases. Much of the media will not talk about them and has not talked about them because they are sponsored by them, or in some cases owned by them, or by the same people that own the companies. NGOs also can do a limited job because, like Urgewald and many good NGOs are doing important work and lawsuits and revealing information and so on, but NGOs cannot directly confront them either, because they can have a lawsuit and, you know, this is a super powerful company, one of the biggest in the world, like Total. They can drive you to the ground, you know, with lawsuits and going after you. So I really think that the power and the hope lies in the grassroots. We are millions around the world whose futures are at stake, and our present in the global south is not a future, it's our present. And if we all came together to have a concrete goal to tackle the same target, instead of multiple actions all over the place on different dates, you know, like Friday is doing one thing, Extinction is doing one thing, and Megalenda is doing one thing, and so on. But imagine if all of us could come together against Total, like it's beginning to happen. Like last year also we did actions against Total. We made a campaign, Total Must Fall, here in Denmark, and the coalition Shale Must Fall against gas, fracking, and colonialism. And with Global South and Global North groups, mostly also all grassroots. And now the Collapse Total, the Glasgow Agreement is helping so that we can put more energy, more groups can focus. And I really hope that this is the beginning. We're still at the beginning, and we don't stop, and we don't give up, because it will take a lot of people and a lot of actions against a single company to bring down their image, so that the stock value can go down, so that we make investors even less inclined to invest in Total, so that because it will look more like a dirty investment as it already is, and so that no one will give them money, no one can afford to give them money without a big political cost to them. So we can help dismantle and collapse Total, and then of course Shell Must Fall, BP, and all the others. I really think this is a great way. And lastly, you know, I want to say that recently it was revealed that Total has known since 1971 about the climate changing implications of their activities. And not only have they done nothing for that, they deliberately paid, they have financed fake science and sown doubt and distrust in the science on climate change to create denial theories, to create climate change denial, to sabotage any opportunity to actually put pressure on them so that they could perpetrate their profits at the expense of us all. So it's been 50 years, half a century. And now 50 years later, we are taking action in a meaningful and powerful way together with the NGOs that are suing them. You know, it needs to be a multi-pronged approach. And that's why I'm very happy to be here in Denmark, because I've been invited to give some talks, but also they said, well, we're going to do something really nice, really cool against Total. So I didn't want to miss that. And, it's been 3 days of actions, including today. I took part in the demo on Tuesday that we did, and then yesterday was the strongest action. We actually invaded their building. We occupied their building, which is the biggest. This is the headquarters of Total for all of Scandinavia, and it is located here in Copenhagen, in the capital of Denmark. About 30 of us occupied the building. We were very successful. We made it to the highest floors where all the executives of Total are. We were able to confront some of them and expose them for the climate criminals they are. I think this was very good and had a lot of impact. And then today I couldn't take part, but there was another action where they wallpapered the building and blockade all the entrances and put a lot of signs on their windows. And this is also very good, so that they have no peace, you know, so that they can see that we are only getting stronger and coming after them day after day after day, and that we are not going to give up. So I'm really happy to be part of this conversation. I'm sorry I couldn't have a better prepared presentation, anything more improvised. But thank you for having me. And if you have any questions, I probably forgot to say a lot of things, but I'm kind of improvising.
Esteban, thank you so much for your precise description of the situation. And it really touches us emotionally what you told us. And yes, I have 2 questions. First, some days ago, we had got this discussion with our former chancellor that natural gas is, if natural gas may be a bridge technology. And he answered that LNG is only a small percentage in the natural gas program. What do you want to add here? So it makes you hot, yes.
Yeah, are you referring to the meeting last Friday? Where
yes, yes.
So there's several reasons why that is a lie. I always, when I do make a PowerPoint presentation, I usually show, well, actually I have a PowerPoint now that I'm preparing for the presentation I have to do next. So if I can briefly show you one slide that is actually coming from the US Energy Agency about the origin of that LNG, you will see not in my words, but in the official information from the US government, why Olaf Scholz is lying. So may I briefly share my...
Yes.
Okay.
Just.
Yeah, there we go.
Take time and...
Can you see it?
Yes, it's shared here.
Okay, so this is an image, a graph from the US Energy Agency. And as you can see, this shows the production of natural gas in the US and the projections until the year 2040, okay? This is scientific and official information from the US government. And as you can see, there is a clear decline in the conventional gas sources. And this is why this is called the fracking revolution. Since the introduction of fracking, the American production of gas has exploded. And by the way, I should also mention here something that many people don't know is that fracking is not only gas. Of course, it's also oil, but it's not only oil and gas. A lot of the gas produced by fracking contains ethane. There's a lot of ethane in the shale formations. Ethane is the raw material for a lot of plastics production. And find a lot of science on this topic that shows how the boom of fracking in the last decade has led to a boom in plastics production. Companies like Ineos in Europe or OMV from Austria, actually Total is one of the world's biggest producers of plastics, I should add, because Total is in a joint venture with OMV from Austria to produce plastics. They made a company called Borealis with B, and that's one of the top 10 producers of plastics in the world. So people that are worried about the pollution of the oceans with plastics and all the things that plastic causes is actually very intimately connected with fracking. So as you can see here, this is why Olaf Scholz is lying. The shale gas, the only reason the US can make any exports of LNG at all, is because of fracking. And the fracking, the gas that is being shipped to Europe from the US comes from fracking mostly. And the LNG terminals that Olaf Scholz and the government of Germany are building in Brunsbüttel and Stade will be importing American gas, mostly from the US, at least at the beginning. The contracts they have explicitly say so. And there is a contract between the Corpus Christi LNG and Stade, where there's a direct connection. And this is only obtained through fracking. So there's the evidence why he's lying. There is also a testimonial by one of the world's leading methane experts, Dr. Robert Howard from the University of Cornell, whom I referenced earlier on the paper that he wrote. He was invited to speak in the Irish Parliament. Let me, I will stop sharing the screen. I just wanted to show you. But Dr. Howard gave his testimony as an expert testimony in the Irish Parliament that was debating to put an end to the import of LNG and to bring down the Shannon and Cork LNG terminal projects that they have. And so Dr. Howard very clearly said, and I have his testimonial in video and in writing, that you can assume pretty much that all of the gas, the LNG imported from the US is obtained via the means of fracking. So Olaf Scholz is lying. He found a quick way to evade the majority of my question. It's up to us, up to you guys in Urgewald and all the other good NGOs that are fighting in the legal means and up to us in the grassroots to hold him accountable for this climate hypocrisy, because they are undermining the global methane pledge, the Paris Agreement, and everything else that they have signed on paper. And just I want to add, last year it was a scandal that that Mr. Scholz sent a letter to Secretary Mnuchin of the US during the Trump administration, offering him to spend 1 billion with a B, euros more in expanding the LNG infrastructure, 1 billion of public funds to expand the LNG import infrastructure to import even more frack gas. And he was offering that in exchange for the US to not put sanctions on Nord Stream 2. So this is a hypocrisy that is hitting up the climate. And
yes, too much subsidies, and yes, you told us everyone is escaping. And another company who tries to escape is Shell. Yes, we were all happy to hear that Netherlands courts decided that they have to reduce 45% of their emission until 2030. But now they put the headquarter from Netherlands to Great Britain. They also try to flee. Yes, so I think we need global pressure that this could not happen every time that they go to another country where climate change is not fighted so much as the Netherlands, who will get big problems because they will problem with the ocean, with the oceans getting higher. So yes, what did you feel as you heard about this Shell decision to switch the country?
I think it's shameful. I think they're shuffling around in their last attempt to escape regulation and justice. And I think it's also a sign that the fossil fuel industry is getting weaker, but they're getting weaker only on the narrative. They're finding it more and more difficult to bullshit us, to play us like a piano, like they have been playing us for the last 50 years. And I think the more of us and in the more countries that we can come together, we have been doing actions of international solidarity with the Shale Must Fall Coalition and Ende Gelände here in Germany. I'm not in Germany now, but in Germany, connecting the dots. I think it's very important that we connect the dots of the supply chain of Shell, of Total, because Total is fracking Argentina or extracting gas in Mozambique or in Russia to be consumed mainly in Europe. So if we can tackle the movements in the global south, can take action against Total in a safe manner, which means not really disruptive actions, but just mobilizations. That doesn't mean people will be put in jail or even worse, because there's high risk to taking action in the global south. And us in the global north tackle the other side of the consumption of the supply chain, which is the consuming end, the LNG import terminals or any other infrastructure that is relevant, or the headquarters of these companies, all together on the same days, try to bring enough visibility, enough media attention until their crimes become public and evident, as they're not really now, because many media don't talk. The big media, the established media, say little about all of these things, and we need to make this more visible so that investment in Total or Shell or BP becomes more and more negative in the view, in the public view, so that no pension funds, no banks, no governments are subsidizing them or loaning them more money, and then eventually they will have no choice but to be held accountable to stop the extraction and the destruction that they are causing.
We have got another question in the chat. How is it possible that the fracking industry is freely contaminating water and the environment, even in the US? Why is there no protest there?
Very good question. And it's not that there is no protest, it's that there may be no protest that you have heard of. And that's the power of the media. You know, in the US is not a democracy. I lived there for 10 years. And today, more than ever, you can see that the US is not really a democracy. Look at what happened at the Capitol and the consequences of that. Nobody's paying any consequences. The US is at the verge of collapse, war. And Trump is on the way back, I'm afraid. So this is really bad for all of us. And within that, what the US has done is, in the strategic national interest of being energetically self-sufficient and American energy dominance, which is what Trump wanted to do, and is still the official policy under Biden. Biden is signing the global methane pledge, and American energy dominance they're still happening at the same time. So this is total. It's not possible. They cannot coexist. And what they're doing is the US is sacrificing its own rural, indigenous, BIPOC, color populations that are poorer, that are, they are on the fringes of American society, who have no voice, who have no impact, have no media attention. Their water is being poisoned, their children are dying. We've had many indigenous groups, including the Carrizo Comecrudo tribe of Texas. Three members and reference people from Texas came to Wende Gelände to Brunsbüttel this summer in July, and they spoke and they explained what has been done, what is being done there. What you can see in all of these stories and the people fighting the pipelines across the US is they are being treated as the global South within the global North. The indigenous communities in the US and Canada, such as the Wet'suwet'en, by the way, in Canada, who are now putting up a heroic blockade to reclaim their land and stop the building of LNG terminals and pipelines, they are being treated as global South, third world citizens with no rights, with the same violations that we in the global South usually suffer, and you wouldn't expect in places of Europe or North America, but they're happening. So that's why you don't hear about them. They're not fracking in New York.
Okay, that's good.
They tried to frack in New York, and you know what happened? New York State banned fracking. But New York is a powerful state. It's a central state that has New York City, Manhattan. Of course, they don't want their water contaminated. Even Rex Tillerson, who was the Secretary of Energy under Trump and used to be the CEO of ExxonMobil, they tried to do it near his home, and then he opposed fracking.
Not in my backyard, yes.
When they asked him, he said, no, I like fracking, just not in my backyard.
Yes, as in Germany with the windmills, yes. Okay, my last question would be, Esteban, what do you think about the global CO2 price? Is this, could this put pressure on the process?
I think there's a lot of initiatives that may have good intentions, but they also could be used by the fossil fuel industry as a greenwashing and manipulation approach, such as the net zero goal that they are trying to put on us, as if somehow carbon capture and storage will save and neutralize what they're emitting, or planting some trees that will take 50 years just to grow to the necessary size to absorb any carbon. So I would be cautious with the carbon tax and any of these initiatives. I think what we need is to stop drilling, stop expanding the fossil fuel industry. Europe and the leading countries of the world need to put their money where their mouth is and really enforce their commitments on the corporations. 100 corporations produce 71% of global emissions. This is seldom said. And Germany says we're going to reduce our emissions. Denmark says we're going to reduce our emissions. But no one is talking about the companies, and the companies are not reducing emissions, they are increasing emissions. And Germany and Europe consuming the gas from fracking, from beyond, they only look at the emissions of that gas when you in Germany. And of course it has less CO2. It's methane. But you don't take into account the transport and the extraction. So it's just insane. Europe is outsourcing its emissions to the rest of the world. And I think that is the lens through which we need to look at the problem, rather than come up with these peripheral ideas that will somehow save the world with the carbon tax.
Yes, we have it here in Berlin. We switch from coal to gas, and the task concerning 2030 for power energy from Vattenfall are lower than for private households. I had a conference this week. It's really crazy how we switch out, export these problems from global north to global south. Esteban, thank you so much for your opinion, for your experience, and for your courage to do all this. And yes, we need grassroots pressure. We have to amplify our pressure, and we have to get louder because the problems are coming nearer and nearer. We saw it in Germany, also in Ahrtal this year. And yes, we have to carry on. Yes, good luck for your projects, and thank you for being here. And yes, to the audience, have a good night.
Thank you very much. Thank you for doing this and covering this topic. And I also have to go